Man, I'm doing well. Man, thank you so much for taking the time to connect with us or connect with me today. I know you're a busy, busy man, man.
Yes.
I'm excited about this. You know what? To be honest, Claude, I never thought that I would be in this space,
Hmm.
in this space, um, talking about these issues. To be honest, I've been in ministry a long time, and most people know me from preaching. Like I'm talking about, like, I'm not just like the average preacher. I'm kind of like I'm slinging oil and talking in tongues, all the whole shebang. And so to be in this space, it's been a journey. It's been a journey. And part of this journey that I have been on is the reclaiming of myself, the reclaiming, the redefining of my masculinity. Um,
Hmm.
and it was funny how I have literally, traveled around the world preaching the gospel and did not know who I was. Still broken, still hurting, still
Hmm.
had, still experienced extremely traumatic issues that I never really uh, dealt with. I kind of shouted over them. I danced over them. Um, I, I did kind of the church stuff over them, and like,
Yep. Yep.
and it was just, it just it definitely put me in a different space now when after I got finished shouting, after I got finished dancing, after I got finished speaking in tongues and doing all of the stuff, how I was still broken, how I was
Hmm.
still, I still had issues. And I don't know, maybe some of you guys that are on here today, you understand where I'm talking about, where yes, Jesus is enough, but I think there's an underlying issue sometimes that we think that we tend to over spiritualize things and instead of dealing with them and dealing with them in a professional manner and in a healthy manner, we wind up becoming highly spiritual but
Yeah.
still extremely broken.
Yeah.
And especially for men, there's a generation of men out here, and this is why I'm pinpointing men, because and not just church but abroad, women, they tend, to be progressive. A lot of times they don't mind talking about their problems or going to support groups, small groups, women groups, like tea parties, pajama parties, hair salon, to talk about their issues. But there was no, as I kind of dove into this process of healing, I realized that there was no real structure for me. There was no real place to go. And it wasn't okay to really talk about our brokennesses. And so that's just the
Yeah.
average man on top of, let's talk about the man that has been sexually traumatized. And I use that specific verbiage in particularly because I sexual trauma, it covers a lot. And we're going to
Yeah.
jump in that. I'm not the professional. I've just professionally gone through it a lot of
Yes. Yes.
so I said all that because I got tired of shouting and dancing and preaching and still feeling empty. Still, and if I be honest, still wanting revenge, still
Yep.
wondering why, still being angry,
Hmm.
and marriage with kids, all of that stuff that there was pressure, the responsibility, it tends to put pressure on all of that. And so I said, you know what? Something has to change. Something has to, you know, has to change for me. And so as I started my process, my journey, I've now found myself in this place, and I pleaded with God, like I told you, man. I said, God, I don't want this platform. I don't want to deal with this issue. I don't want to. And to be honest, He said, here you go. And so I
Hmm.
didn't do it. I didn't build it. It just was handed to me. And so I said, okay, God. And I tried to run. Um, and the Lord kept telling me, do what I told you to do. Do what I told you to do.
Mhm.
And so we're here.
Mhm.
I don't want to over spiritualize tonight, but I do want to delve in. Everybody, Claude King is with us, and I'm so excited that he is here. Claude, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're on this Facebook Live with us?
Yes, yes, yes. So I've been in the field since 2013. The reason why I got into being, first of all, majoring in psychology and being a therapist, my dad is a pastor. Some people know that, but my dad is a pastor, my mom's a teacher. So they're in service fields. And just hearing the conversations that were had at the dinner table, especially my mom, who taught over 30 years in CPS and in the Inglewood community at that, and just all the community violence and systemic issues that the students she was working with and their families were dealing with, and just wanting to do something at a very early age, wanting to help the people that she was working with. And I remember her telling me, I was really young, she's like, make sure whatever you decide to do in your career, make sure you give back. So I had that mindset going into my college career, majored in psychology, fell in love with it, took a year off, worked in a residential treatment center. And I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to work with kids. I want to work with families. I want to work with couples. Went back to grad school and got my degree 2013 in marriage and family counseling. Since then, I've worked in a variety of different settings, worked in residential centers, worked in office-based settings, done home-based work, worked in pretty much every setting imaginable except for a hospital setting. Currently, oh, and then to backtrack a little bit, a lot of the experience I have is working with youth involved in the child welfare system.
Mm,
So these are youth that have been abused, have been neglected, were taken away from their families, put into the foster care system, and our agency was contracted to provide therapy services for both the kids and then the adults that lost custody of their children and or had to go through a myriad of different services to get custody of their children back. So in doing that, I worked with a lot of kids that experienced physical abuse, sexual abuse, and that was just very eye-opening for me at the time. Um, work with DCFS Youth. Currently, I am a clinical therapist at Children's Research Triangle. I've been there for about a year and a half. There, I work with youth in a school setting. We have contracts, I shouldn't say contracts, we have partnerships with different organizations and high schools across the Chicagoland area. So, under the grant that I'm under, which is a violence prevention grant, I work at Al Raby High School and Marshall High School, doing individual counseling sessions, running stress management groups, doing restorative justice work. And then I recently started a practice, a solo practice on the south side of Chicago in the Beverly neighborhood about a year ago, on 107th and Western. And there I see mostly adults and couples. I see some teens as well too. So I get a good mixture of both. So I want to just take a moment to, thank you for allowing me to have this platform to talk on this issue. This has been something that has been a really big issue for a long time. It's something that I became really aware of. That was very shocking for me that so much sexual abuse is going on in society, especially with men, and it's not being talked about. It's being swept underneath the rug. And then, as you said, we use spirituality and church to kind of cover it up.
yeah.
This has been something I've been really passionate about speaking on for some years now. I just didn't know how to get the platform. I don't know if I need to join an organization that did this type of work, or does advocacy, but I'm really excited to talk on this issue.
Well, you know what, to be honest, I didn't know how to get the platform either. So I didn't know how to start. And I said, you know what, this is it. So I want to delve right in. So, Claude, what is sexual trauma? What is sexual trauma, and how can someone or a man identify that they may be dealing with some unaddressed or unhealed trauma?
Yeah, so I'll break that down a little bit. Just kind of a twofold question. So first of all, trauma is when somebody experiences a distressing event, very emotionally distressing. It could be something that was life threatening or just threatened their safety. It could have been something that was very scary for them, dangerous or violent, and um, and they could have lost their life. And so that's trauma. And then sexual trauma is just basically very similar, but just it's trauma of a sexual nature. So this is somebody that may have been sexually abused as a child, touched in an inappropriate way, somebody who was maybe raped later in life. And the trauma related symptoms that they experience are of a sexual nature. Um, what makes a situation traumatic is how the person is able to cope with it afterwards. You have a spectrum of stress and trauma. Stress is at one end, and then you have what's traumatic stress.
Okay.
Normal stress is your everyday, like, life stress. Waking up, going to work, getting to work on time, having deadlines you have to meet, public speaking, taking care of kids, bills, finances. Those are normal everyday stressors that people deal with. And people over time learn how to cope with those type of stressors.
Right.
Even if it causes a lot of physiological symptoms like increased heart rate and deep breathing and sweating, over time you learn how to cope with it and manage it better. And then after the stressor is gone, you eventually return back to your baseline state. When stress becomes traumatic is when after that stressor is gone, you're still at a heightened state. So if you can imagine, um, like an alert going off in your body, and then you, even after the danger is gone, the alert is still going on. It doesn't shut off. So that's what makes stress traumatic. Um, so if traumatic stress goes untreated, some of the things that can happen is you can develop PTSD like symptoms, post
Mhm.
traumatic stress disorder.
Can you explain
These are
that?
things like having, yeah, so it's a cluster of different symptoms that you have that meet the diagnosis. But you can have some of the symptoms in isolation without meaningful criteria for PTSD diagnosis. So some of these symptoms are like having difficulty sleeping, having difficulty going to sleep, staying asleep, having nightmares,
Yeah.
being very irritable, reliving the experience or having reenactments of the experience, um, and just feeling isolated from people, not wanting to be around anybody. And those are, and then also avoiding places, people, things, situations that remind you of the original experience. So that's pretty much what PTSD looks like.
Okay. So, wow. As I'm listening to you, I'm looking at my own life and I'm like, man. So, because when you think of PTSD, like you hear it normally with people who have been in war or in the military, and we kind of figure that those are the people who may be suffering from PTSD or with PTSD. So, what you're saying
Mhm.
is, if I have experienced a sexual trauma, then or a sexual or some form of sexual abuse or any uninvited sexual experience, uninvited,
Mhm.
unwanted sexual experience, regardless if it was full on, sex or even touching, groping, um, that I can experience certain types or symptoms of PTSD.
Yes, definitely, definitely, yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because a lot of people think that PTSD is very associated with veterans. Only veterans have PTSD. But people across the Chicagoland area that grow up in communities where there's a lot of violence, growing up in homes with domestic violence, physical abuse that's going on, neglect, you can develop PTSD symptoms as well too. It is not isolated to just war veterans.
So how does this generally look in victims of sexual abuse or sexual trauma? Because and let's go back and kind of let's lay a framework for sexual trauma or sexual abuse. There's I know in my own research that there's sexual abuse, that there are how can someone become sexually traumatized?
Hmm. Hmm. So there's the act of sexual abuse, right? So that's like you said, the unwanted touching, like groping, penetration, all that stuff. The trauma will come after the abuse it might be still continuing or it could have ended. And the trauma is kind of the symptoms that accompany it. So if whatever the victim experience was very distressing for them, they didn't like it. They just made them really uncomfortable. They feel like their life was threatened, um, and then those feelings are not kind of processed through or dealt with. And people typically try to cope with things the best that they can, and usually what people do is just try to push it in the back of their head. They try not to think about it. They try to repress it, or they might act out aggressively towards other people, or they just isolate themselves, and they don't deal with whatever happened. That's when it leads to these trauma related symptoms.
Mm,
That's when it starts having like a longer impact. Like it starts affecting your sleep cycle. It starts affecting your ability to feel safe going places, seeing people that remind you of the person that victimized you,
mm,
other things that you wouldn't even think are connected to the abuse. It might have been a song that was playing or a TV show that was on while it was happening,
yeah.
and then that will trigger the memory of the abuse, and you'll have these physiological symptoms. The heart rate will increase, start to sweat, your muscles will tense up, you disassociate, and your mind goes back to that place where the abuse happened. And it can really affect your functioning. If you're at work and this is happening, or you're a kid and you're in school and you're trying to learn and you're not even present in the classroom, you're not even paying attention to what the teacher is saying because your mind is somewhere else.
Yeah. So in my experience, and even in my experience, um, even dealing with men um, who have been sexually traumatized, or have gone through sexual experiences, um, and some research sometimes, right, the body for men, sex sometimes is physiological, is physical. And so, from what I've read, what I've understood is that sometimes men can experience sexual, some form of sexual abuse, and even as boys, young boys,
Mhm.
and they actually like it, or actually their body physically responds in a
Right.
good way. And can you know where I'm going with that? Can you
Yes.
piggyback on that?
Yeah.
I'm
So it's 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 it's
I'm here.
particularly okay, you're here. Okay. It's particularly confusing for men because um some men, when they're being sexually abused, they might achieve an erection, and their body is stimulated. Some men might even ejaculate during the sexual abuse. So there's just a lot of confusing feelings about that. Like, did I enjoy this? Like, I know I didn't like it, but my body did. And what does that mean? Does that, then you go into the whole thing about, you starting to question your sexuality, especially if this was done, the perpetrator was another man. So it's like, and does that mean that I'm gay? Does that mean that I like men? And I had a client I was working with for over a year who, he's my age, and his abuse happened to him between sixth grade and eighth grade. Actually, was suing the archdiocese of the Catholic Church because his abuse was done by a priest. And he told me during one of the sessions that he didn't know if he was attracted to men or women. He was having sexual relationships with both men and women well into his mid 20s. and he thought it was normal because this experience happened to him as a young boy, and he thought this is what life is supposed to be like. He didn't know that, this was wrong. So he said he didn't realize that he was exclusively attracted to women and wanted to solely be in a relationship with a woman until he was like in his mid to late 20s. So
Wow.
it's very, very compounded with men, and then our bodies achieving erection and stuff like that.
Wow. So yeah, I want to kind of park there for a minute because a lot of times in men, like, and sexual trauma that happens to, or these type of situations that happen to boys, how does it play out? How does it and I hate to use this word, but how does it tend to play out in the lives of adult men who have
Hmm.
experienced these sexual, and I want to weave in some of my story with this. Growing up, I grew up in church. First of all, I didn't know you were PK, so that just blew my mind. You hid that from me, bro. Um, so I grew up in church where, and I grew up in the holiness movement, like straight up. I won't put any organizations out there, but I grew up in straight holiness Pentecostal movements where it was this sense of, or this really big push for holiness, 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 holiness. You have to live holy. But in the same breath, a lot of the people that would preach holiness to me were my very abusers, or the people during that time that I didn't realize that it was molestation. I didn't realize
Yep.
at that moment as a, you know, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, up to, 18, 19 years old, that these were adult men, some with wives and children, who
Yeah.
invited me in for because I've been preaching my entire life, who invited me in, to travel with them, to preach with them, to sing for them, to play for them. And they would, we would have great church, but then would go into hotel rooms and do some of the most ungodly
Mm.
things. And me not realizing at that moment, or in those times, that that was actually sexual abuse. That was sexual molestation. It was molestation. In some instances, it was rape. Um, but at the same time, because I was not cognitively aware
Right.
of this became my norm. And
Right.
so then I started, of course, having other relationships or other sexual experiences with other people or with other men. And because this is how I was shaped, this was how I understood, this is what my body was introduced to before I
Right.
could even really make up a decision who I wanted
Right.
to be, what I wanted to do. Did I like women? Did I like men? What did that look like? And I realized until my early, maybe 22, 23, I started realizing I never had a chance to choose.
Yeah.
I never had a chance to choose. And you kind of go through, and I want to specifically talk to men here, because you start kind of going through life, because as men, that's what we do. We have to continue to move. We got to continue to live life. We got to become men, and
Hmm.
grind and make it happen. And men, we compartmentalize. We
Yep.
compartmentalize our lives. We compartmentalize our relationships. And
Yep.
so it's crazy. I would be in a relationship over here with a woman. I would be experiencing having sexual relationships with this guy over here. Then I would have my church life over here, and then my family life over there. And none of the areas really touched,
Right.
never really touched. But the thing that was controlling all of those pieces was my experience, was the experience and the sexual trauma or the sexual experiences that I had starting early as the age of 4. Part of my
Right.
story is I remember, um, um, and I'm gonna get in trouble here, but anyway, I wrote a book. It's called Just Believe. Some of this stuff is in my book, but so if you want to know where you can get it on Amazon. But I remember the first, sexual experience with a family member and saying, "Hey, put your mouth here." And I'm just and not even cognitively realizing what was really comprehending what was going on. And I think, Claude, it hit me like when I
Yeah.
turned about 21, 22, like, wait a minute. And especially when I started having children and realizing the state of where children, how children develop, I was like,
Mhm. Mhm.
who does this? Who does
Mhm.
this? And then I was left to deal with the broken pieces that were left in my life from the broken men that were in
Mhm.
my life.
Mhm.
That's a
Mhm.
that's a
Ooh,
that was
man, I'm glad that you shared that too, cause and then I want to go off of that, and I'm kind of thinking about just the whole R. Kelly thing right now, and it's just the fact that he was sexually abused as a kid by his older sister, and you know, thinking about like how could somebody do this to a kid? It was most likely done to them, and this is kind of what can happen if you don't get treatment for it at a young age. It can turn into this grown man who has power, who has influence, has money, that is starting to victimize a lot of other people as well too. And it's a cycle. It's as a cycle, and it takes a really strong individual like yourself to be like, to just first of all have the awareness that this is what happened to me. This wasn't right. I've been trying to avoid it my whole life and I just can't shake it. And I need to like directly address this. I have to heal this part of my life so I can be the best man I could be for my wife and for my children and for my church.
man. It was, and it almost brings me to tears thinking about it now because I didn't realize. And part of this is there's a younger generation that I'm realizing, and I'm 30 now, and so at this age, things start moving around in your head. You start realizing, you know, and just looking back and saying, "Man, I was dumb." Like I have a saying, like I was young, dumb, and full of cum. Just like, just doing things because they were urges, and also it was introduced to me and never really had the chance to say, this is who I am. And so
Hmm.
part of the process for me and was reclaiming my body, redeeming
Right.
my body, renewing my mind. And I talk about before all of that was I then realized after I got to a certain point and I had an experience that broke me. It literally broke me. Had an emotional breakdown. It was horrible, and one of my mentors had to come and get me because it was just that bad. And
Hmm.
I remember saying, now I never slept with anyone who was underage, but I I realized that I had basically committed the same act, not abuse, so it wasn't anybody younger. But for some, there was definitely a power dynamic there.
Right.
And
Right.
I realized that now that I had basically done to him what was done to me.
Right.
And that's when I broke. I realized I had become, and there's
Yeah.
power dynamics there. So we
Oh
have
yeah.
careful. And you want to delve into that, like those power dynamics? Um,
Yeah.
those are really big. Like And especially if you've been placed in a place of authority, in a place of power, whether you're a pastor, a mentor, a coach, we see it
Mhm.
out the news, man,
Mhm.
all throughout
Mhm.
the news, these power dynamics. And this is one of the reasons why we have to have this conversation, Claude,
Mhm.
because these same broken men become fathers. These same broken men become our coaches, become our pastors, become our politicians, become our priests, become our teachers.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we don't deal with them and we don't acknowledge their brokenness until it's too late.
Yep. Yep.
Um, and so how, in your own opinion, um, how does this happen? How, like, it's a
Mhm.
cycle. I have a saying, hurt people, right?
Yep. Yep.
And
Mhm.
why is it? And why is it that in men, and I think culture plays a part of it, black men, Hispanic men, white men, whatever type of male, um,
Mhm.
why is there such a stigma? Like, how does this happen? And why is there a stigma for men who need help,
Mhm. Mhm.
admitting that they need it before it's
Mhm.
too late? Be-
Yeah. Yeah. So, like you said, it's a power dynamic, and I want to be clear. The sexual abuse is never, rarely is about sexual satisfaction. It's about abusing power. And like you said, people who are in positions of power, priests, coaches, mentors, babysitters, a family friend, whoever, people who have a lot of money, they abuse that power by sexually abusing somebody. And it happens because sometimes it's because they've been sexually abused themselves. Sometimes they might be going through a myriad of different other mental health issues, and that's the way that they choose to cope with it or release it or whatever the case may be, is by victimizing somebody who cannot defend themselves. And there's a period of grooming that takes place where the perpetrator will kind of select somebody who has some type of vulnerability, either somebody, maybe a kid who's like really quiet, that doesn't talk that much, maybe kind of isolated from peers, doesn't have a strong family support system, or maybe getting neglected by their family, might not have financial means, might even have some type of disability, might not be a talkative person. And then the grooming starts with giving compliments, giving money, doing whatever they can do to try to make that victim feel comfortable. Then it starts with just touching, non-sexual touching, on the back, on the shoulder, giving a hug, just to kind of test the waters, as you speak, to see if this kid will say anything, this young man will say anything. If they don't, then they take it up a notch further. Then the duration and the frequency of the touching increases. So maybe the hugs get longer, they get tighter. The hand on the shoulder or the back starts to go to the butt. The hand on the knee starts to go to the thighs, starts to go to the inner thigh, to the groin. And then if the person continues not to say anything, which is no fault of the kid, I want to make that known. Then they'll try to isolate the kid, and then that's when the sexual abuse starts. So that's kind of the process of grooming. And then I just want to say that a lot of people like to blame the victim, and it's like, why didn't you say anything? Why did you let this happen? How come you didn't run away? You didn't fight it off? And it's because it's a power dynamic. This person is somebody who is a trusted person in whatever system they're working in, whether it's church or a coach of a high profile football team, or a mentor. This person might even have the trust of your family.
yeah,
And they don't, especially young men, don't want to say anything because, one, they feel like they're not going to be believed. They feel like they're going to have this stigma that um, they enjoyed it, they liked it because they let it continue on for such a long time, a period of years. They don't want to have their sexuality questioned at all. They just don't want that judgment, and they feel some shame and guilt themselves that they feel like they could have, way after the fact, they feel like it was something that they could have done to stop it, and they didn't. They were just frozen. So that's kind of how the grooming process works, and why young boys don't end up speaking out about what happened to them.
So, Claude, I want to ask, and I ask this question specifically because um, it's an epidemic. How does this relate, or do you think that young men or men in general who grew up without fathers or who had broken relationship with their fathers are more prone to be victims of sexual abuse or sexual trauma than those who
Mm.
and the reason why I say this, I'm asking this question, because there's a group, I don't know what in God's name happened in the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s to father.
Yeah.
I just don't know. They, between drugs, being arrested, a conglomerate of, you know, of stuff, I felt like that was the shaggy time. It wasn't me. You're like, I'm not, it was just like, it was just like, there's this huge generation, a huge group of people and boys, men now, and we're talking about from baby boomers on down, who grew up without fathers and longed for that male, that fatherly experience. They long for that love. They long for that affirmation. They long for that connection. And
Hmm.
sometimes wound it up, not only that, or not wind up in stuff where those connections really had other strings attached to them.
Mm.
And maybe I need to delve
Mm.
into that because that delves into my story a little bit. Um, I didn't have just one abuser or one experience. I have at least to date, I've had about maybe 7 or 8 over my lifetime.
Hmm.
And I kind of grew up not knowing who my father was, being deceased, whatnot, and preaching. I traveled with a lot of different pastors, preachers, whatnot, and was looking for, and not just pastors, preachers, principals. Man, if I started yelling, putting out names, I would get in trouble.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
I also realized that doesn't help either. But
Hmm.
I realized that these people, these men, were people that not only did I trust, and I was looking for affirmation, I was looking for fatherly love, um, but they also were one broken themselves, and they were trusted not only by my family but by our community.
Right.
And it was always the rhetoric was going to be, it was always going to be your word against mine.
Right.
And so there's that power dynamic again. Um, but in the same breath, and part of my experience being abused and taken advantage of by teachers and pastors and mentors, and over the years that I've traveled with, that I've known, who are majority of them are still walking around today. Um,
Hmm.
it not only were they trusted, or there was this dynamic of, and I've realized it was manipulation, that it was going to be your word against mine, and if you say something, they won't believe you. And I remember the one time I did try to say something, I got threatened. My life was threatened,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
that kind of shut it down, and I learned how to keep secrets really quickly.
Mm.
So I want to I want to just piggyback off of that. Do you think that boys um, who grow up without fathers um, are more likely to be victims of some sort of sexual trauma? Not to say that their mothers aren't doing a great job, or their grandmothers in a single parent household, but maybe what is your take on that?
Yeah, I never really thought about that in depth until you just brought it up. So thank you for sharing that perspective. But I think it's definitely a possibility that if you didn't grow up with a strong, positive male role model, a father figure in your life, that you might latch on to the first person that shows you some positive attention,
Right.
and try to develop a father-like relationship with them. And then just growing up without a father, and you're developing this relationship with this person, you don't know what it's supposed to look like. There's no boundaries or guidelines. You're a kid, so you're following the lead of this trusted male figure. So whatever he does, you like, well, this person is a coach and he's a pastor and people respect him. So what he's saying or what he's doing should be right. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. So you're really following their lead. And then, even if you feel like it doesn't feel right to you, but he's like, but this is the pastor of the church. This is the coach. Like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I shouldn't be questioning him. So
Or
yeah,
even,
I
or
never even thought about it from that perspective.
and I think for me, in my experience, it was knowing that there was something wrong, but I because I value what the relationship did for me and what it gave to me,
Mm,
I was willing to sacrifice my body on the altar of he cares about me, he loves me,
mm,
showing me affection, he's giving me the attention. And this is what I learned being a father. And I want to talk to really quick, if you pause right here, I want to talk to the man that is here, the young man, the teen, the young man that is here that is dealing with the guilt and the shame of your trauma. I want to let you know that number one, it is not your fault. It is not your fault. It is not your responsibility to carry that weight. That was not God's intention for you. That was the result of somebody broken who took advantage of you and tried to place their brokenness upon you.
yeah.
That is not who you are. That is not what God has called you to. God loves you and he has something better in store for your life. But I wanted to piggyback off of this, Claude, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to preach, but I had to take that moment. Um,
Now go ahead, man.
I had to take this moment because I remember saying to myself, I wanted the affirmation. I needed the love, and I wanted to be loved. And because of
Mm,
that, I was willing to put, I learned that because the only way that I could get that love was by pleasing a man in their bed.
mm, mm,
That was the way I
mm,
was formed. That
mm,
love equals sex. That if I
mm,
could please you, then you would love me. Then I would feel wanted. I would feel valued.
mm,
And I realized as a father of three children and two boys that it is natural for a young boy to want to be loved. It is natural for a young boy to be held, to be hugged, to be kissed, to have affectionate, healthy, affectionate touches from their father. That
yes.
is natural. And what has happened to a generation of people is that because you did not have that, we did not have that experience, then when it did come, it came perverted. It came with an agenda. And you are now sitting in a place trying to pick up the broken pieces of your life and of your experiences, and you thought it was your fault. And everything that you experienced or that you desired was natural, and it was supposed to be something that you received from your natural father. It is not, and it's, it's what was crazy, Claude. It was very hard for me to hug and kiss my sons because I was contending with this form of hyper masculinity and not wanting my boys to be soft, especially where I came from. I didn't want my boys to be soft. I didn't want people to think that they were gay and that they were this. And I'm just like, they're 3 and they're 4, and where is this coming from? It was coming from my
Yeah.
own brokenness. And let me just
Mhm.
put this out there. Everybody who is flamboyant and who may be a little bit more effeminate, number one, is not homosexual, and they are not the only ones who are dealing with these types of issues. You have pastors, you have fathers, you have professional sports players. The manliest of men are dealing with these own brokennesses. And do you not know that even men who have not been sexually traumatized, but a lot of men have these issues because of the lack of affirmation, love, touch, care that they never received from their father.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. And to go along with that, the particular client I was working with, just to give you an idea of how it impacted him as an adult, um, he had 2 young sons that he was extremely overprotective with. He didn't want them to be around any men without him being able to supervise them. He was like halfway joking, but he was like serious at the same time. He's like, I want my kids to be homeschooled. I don't even want them to go to school. If my kids become adults, I still want them to live with me so I can watch over them. Even if they get married and have their kids, I want to be able to have a house that's big enough so that they can stay there. They didn't never have to be by themselves. And his hypervigilance to protect them got so bad to the point where he would just react very aggressively and try to fight anybody that he thought was going to hurt his kids or whatever. And then his kids got to a point where like they wouldn't even tell him anything that happened at school or whatever. They'll go to the mom because it's like, you tell dad, he's gonna explode, he's gonna react, and he's gonna go up to the school, he's gonna try to fight people and stuff like that. So he was dealing with that. It made him not want to go back to the church. He said he hasn't been in a church since. Whenever he drives past the church, he just has all these physiological symptoms that happen with him. Um, just a loss of confidence. Didn't love himself. Very angry all the time, wanting to fight everybody. Lost like several jobs because anybody who had a position of authority over him, whether it was a supervisor or like the boss of the company or like a police officer, anybody who has any type of authority, he like butts heads against them because he doesn't like that power dynamic, and that comes from when he was a kid. Didn't have any relationships like friendships or anything with men, and if he started to have like a friendship with a guy, it would kind of fizzle out over time because he just never really felt comfortable being around men. His wife told me that I was the only man that he actually talks to. And he was kind of like not mandated to come meet with me, but as he was going through the settlement process, the lawyers recommended that he speak to a therapist. But um, just had a very difficult time connecting with people, isolated himself. Then you bring up just substance abuse, just smoking weed and drinking alcohol, like just over excessively, just to numb himself because he was always on alert. He couldn't shut his body off. He couldn't sleep. He couldn't think. So
Wow.
he needed to numb himself with substances just so he can just get through the day. So that was, and then having intimacy problems with his wife. He says that he has a really hard time being intimate with his wife because, as you can imagine, you try to be intimate with your wife, and then your first sexual experience is when you were abused when you're in 6th grade. and his mind is not even in the act with his wife. He's thinking about his abuse, and then he's just like, just can't enjoy it. So this impacted almost every area of his life. These experiences that he had when he was sick in sixth, seventh, and eighth grade have impacted his whole life, and he's just now trying to address it.
Wow, Claude, that's just great. And you kind of segued into my next question. How does this play out in the lives of adult men? Because it's one thing to be abused as a young kid, but the truth is, a lot of people who will see this are not young kids. They're grown men at this stage. And
Hmm.
so um, you gave some really key examples of how this plays out an adult male's life. Lack of intimacy, hypersexuality, right? There's a story. There's a young a guy where or I've realized even in my conversations and research, men typically go in two directions. Um, they tend to be hypersexual, and they either gravitate towards men or they gravitate like for men because this is what they've known, this is what they were introduced to, or to kind of prove their masculinity and prove
Right.
heterosexuality, they become extremely hypersexual, hoish with women,
Hmm.
right? And so you talked about the substance abuse, you talked about all of that stuff. Did you want to shed any more light on that? Like, how, if now that I am a grown man, now that I'm an adult, how do I manage? How do I address? How do I begin the road to recovery
Yeah.
of this experience, from this experience?
Yeah. Well, I think the path to healing is first acknowledging that this is an issue for you. This is something that is impacting several areas of your life. You're not able to function. You're not able to have healthy relationships, healthy friendships with men. Your relationship with your wife is struggling because you can't really be intimate. You're angry all the time. It's affecting your work, your money. So first acknowledging that this core issue that I've been dealing with since my childhood is currently affecting all
Yeah,
the areas of my life. So just acknowledging that you're hurting and you need help, and then the next step is when you're ready, being able to reach out for help. You have therapists that are trained on dealing with these sort of issues. You have support groups, etc. Um, and then and that's when you're ready. Some people might not be ready to do that, but everybody does it on their own timeline. But the longer that you wait and you you know avoid trying to reach out for help, the more intense these trauma symptoms get. um, People typically just repress it off back, just try to repress it, try to avoid it, just move on with the day. They got to go to work, they got to, pay the bills. So the longer you repress it, the more intense the symptoms get. And that was the case with my particular client. And it really starts to impact other areas of your life really bad. So acknowledging that you need help, reaching out for help, talking to a therapist, going to a support group, whatever you need to do.
wow. So that's that that's huge. Um, and I want to start. And for those people on Facebook Live, if you have any questions, feel free to add any questions you may have. Um, so how um, how do we rewrite the narrative um, of to what it means to be a man um, for men
Yeah.
who have been sexually traumatized? And let me just piggyback on that or say this: a lot of the men that I mentor, a lot of the men that that I am currently mentoring, past, present, and I'm sure in the future, this issue of masculinity and what it means to be a man
Hmm.
sometimes is the core to their struggle and their identity struggle, who they were, who they are, who they desire to be. And
Hmm.
I felt led by God to do is to help rewrite that narrative. Because can I say, if I can be honest about, and I guess I can be honest, this is my platform, to say men are often grossly misunderstood. Um, and especially men who, I'll say men of color, um, are often grossly misunderstood and ignored. And what I mean by ignored is that we don't often, or society does not often pay attention to their men unless they want to, unless two things happen. And I think you know where I'm about to go with this.
Yeah.
One, when somebody's ready to have a sexual encounter, and two, when they've done something dumb or when it's too late. So men, especially men of color, we're either sex symbols,
Mhm.
or we're on the other spectrum where we're criminals. It tends to be the two dynamics that we tend to really get called upon. And so many men, I got to speak into this, identify who they are and they define their level of masculinity by their sexual conquest,
Yep.
or how large their extremities are, and how and I gotta delve into this, and I hope you feel comfortable talking about it. You're a therapist, so I'm sure.
Yeah. I talk about everything.
So, and matter of fact, I just had a conversation with one of my mentees today about because I had this conversation with him because for a long time he defined himself by the size of what he carried in his pants and how many people he slept with, um, which defined what and it's what he used to define his narrative, to define his masculinity. And I've had a mentee that said to me, remember, he said, "Well, this is the only thing that I can do well. This is the only thing that they don't complain about that I do wrong." And it was eye opening.
Yeah.
It was eye opening
Yeah.
because how many of us have defined ourselves by our sexual conquest, by our sexual experiences, how well we could have pleased someone else, and we've
Yeah.
used that as a form, as a method to define who we are. And I just want to say to any man out there, you're worth so much more.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
as a therapist, how do we rewrite this narrative? Because I am out on a mission to to rewrite this narrative, to redeem this narrative, because I believe before anybody does anything crazy, there's always a trail. There's always cries for help. And I think
Hmm.
oftentimes those cries for help are ignored and they're kind of pushed away in the back corner. Men are pushed away until they commit a crime or do something crazy, and then we lock them up, throw them away, and it's too late.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think it starts with forums like this where there's open dialogue, when it's people like you, that your testimony is so powerful because you've actually experienced it. It's people like you not being afraid of being judged or having this negative stigma attached to you, speaking up about these issues. So continued education, advocacy, raising awareness about issues such as these, mentors, that is so key to a young man's self-esteem, as having other young men who have done work themselves to be the best men that they can and have overcome issues that they've been dealing with since they were younger, being able to speak to these young men and build them up and let them know that they're more than just their sexual conquest, that they're a young black king, that they're intelligent, that they can achieve anything they put their mind to. Um, that you're more than just an athlete. You're more than just a rapper, musician. You can do anything that you want to. So it's stuff like that I think will help rewrite the narrative. So this is why I've been so passionate about doing this type of work and speaking on sexual abuse issues, is because this is something that can really break a man. It can really break a man, and this is something that needs to be addressed. It's not being addressed. Like you said, it's men are pushing it to the back of their mind and trying to move forward and try to cope with it the best that they can, but then it's coming out in all these different ways, and then people are not realizing that it's a cry for help. They're like, this dude is angry, he's aggressive, he's beating on women, and he's trying to talk to young girls, and he doesn't have a job. Like, they see all the negative things. They don't see that this man is in pain, because men, we're not good about talking about how we feel. We're not good at being vulnerable. So that piece as well too. Like, it's okay to express how you feel. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to let people know you need help. Um,
Claude,
so I think it's all of that together is how we can make some progress in this area.
you know why I had to talk about this? Because I have two sons. I have two sons. And I realize they deserve more than having a broken father.
Yeah.
They deserve better. And we have a responsibility, because at this stage in the game, and if you've gone through any type of sexual trauma, and I'll just say it for me, I couldn't blame people anymore for my own brokenness. Yes, and what I mean by that is I can't change the past. And there was a time in my life where I went back to all my accusers and asked them why. Some of them
Mm,
apologized. Some of them explained to the majority of them said it happened to me, and that was what I just. But then I had some that denied it, and some that just tried to write me off. And those are the ones that really pissed me off, to be honest. But I realized in that process, because I was blessed to be able to go back and do that, was that though that may have happened to me, I have to take responsibility for my own healing. I have to take responsibility for my own breakthroughs. I have to pursue it.
yep.
Peace has to be pursued. And many of us men are, like you said, many men are walking around. We have the weight of the responsibility of the world on our shoulder. And people don't realize the very infrastructure that is supposed to hold you together is about to collapse any day now. And I want to talk to the man who is carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, but you're about to break. You're about to lose it. Some of you, you love God, you love people, but you're broken. You're hurting. If you are one of these, if you are a man that love that, and I don't want to just talk to Christians, but if you love God, you love your family, you love your wife, but there are habits that you just can't seem to break. There are things that in your life that you can't seem to kick. Maybe it's time to pursue some healing. Maybe it's time for some breakthrough. And I'm not talking about church stuff. I'm talking about coming back and allowing the space and the time and the opportunity to sit down with somebody like Claude to delve into the broken pieces of your life. The time for you shouting and dancing and continuing to work and serve and sacrifice and build somebody else's dreams, somebody else's vision, and even continue with your own dreams and visions. You can't build broken, because if you do, you will eventually break.
Hmm. Amen.
What else did you wanna what else do you want to put on there, man?
Now we gonna end with that. Well said.
Well, listen, guys, thank you so much, Claude, for your expertise, for spending some time with me today on this here live. This is the first one, and man, I hope you enjoyed it. I did.
Oh,
Um,
definitely.
I did. I want to put out there. Um, we're going to be back um, uh, next week, I believe. Um, and I want you guys to join us. If you need a counselor, you need to begin the process of healing. Listen, I encourage you to connect and find Claude on social media. You want to tell them a little bit about how they can find you.
Yeah. So Psychology Today, it's pretty much the biggest network of mental health professionals in the nation. Psychologytoday.com. You can type in my name, you can find me there. Um, the practice that I have, it's actually a collaborative of different therapists that share the same office space, but we all have our own individual practices. It's called Beverly Therapists. You can type in Beverly Therapist, look on the website, and then you can find my name, find my contact information, and you can kind of see what type of a little bit about my bioclinical experiences, what type of populations I work with, and then it has my number and email if you want to reach out to me there. So yeah, Psychology Today, Beverly Therapist. My email address, clk.therapist@gmail.com.
Awesome, man. And I also want to piggyback. Listen, August 31st, this is just the beginning. This right here, this is just the beginning. August 31st, we're going to be hosting Silenced, um, a Silence. It's an event for male survivors of sexual trauma. I'm so excited about it. And I want to encourage you guys to make it there. Join us. We're going to be having conversations, restorative justice, peace circles, um, panel discussion, workshops, healing sessions. It's going to be amazing. Listen, you can register on Eventbrite, or you can go to my website, gloryhouseministries.com. I'm sorry, gloryhouseministries.org, and you can register for it there. If you want to know more about my story, you can get my book, Just Believe, Reasons Why Your Faith Matters. That's just the beginning. I'm actually writing another book, Claude, that delves more into this story. So once again, Claude, everybody, um, let's flood Claude with more questions and his own platforms. But Claude, once again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much. I want to also give a shout out to my boo, Jacqueline Marshall. I love you, boo. Uh, and so thank you once again, Claude, for your time. I appreciate it. This won't be the last time, won't be the last dialogue. All right?
Thank you, Robert.
All right, man. Well, you have a good one. Everyone else, be blessed. Love y'all.